In 1993, a disturbing accusation against Michael Jackson exploded across television screens in America, forever changing the legacy of the most famous man on Earth. Within days, local investigators, aggressive lawyers, and eventually the FBI became entangled in one of the most controversial and highly publicized celebrity investigations in modern history. By 2003, Jackson's sprawling Neverland ranch was raided. Elite behavioral analysts from the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group were called in to consult, and 16 of Jackson's personal computer hard drives were confiscated for intense forensic extraction. The media had already convicted him in the court of public opinion. The world firmly believed that a deeply disturbed monster was hiding behind the gates of his amusement park home. But decades later, when the official FBI files were finally declassified and unsealed, they revealed a stunning reality that most people still don't know. To understand what federal investigators actually found hidden on those hard drives, we first have to understand the fractured mind of the man they were investigating, because the psychology of Michael Jackson is far darker, far more tragic, and infinitely more complex than a simple tabloid headline. To decipher the bizarre reality of the king of pop, you have to look at the man who built him, his father, Joe Jackson. From the time Michael was 5 years old, he wasn't treated as a developing human being. He was a highly lucrative product. He was entirely stripped of a normal, carefree childhood and forced into a grueling schedule of daily rehearsals, driven by the absolute terror of severe physical abuse. Joe Jackson didn't just discipline his children, he tormented them. Michael was beaten with belt buckles, whipped with the cords of electric kettles, and forced to do heavy manual labor like carrying cinder blocks as punishment for missing a dance step. The psychological toll on young Michael was catastrophic. His mind suffered what clinical psychologists call somatization, a condition where severe, repressed emotional distress physically attacks the body. He was so deeply terrified of his father that he would frequently vomit just looking at him. This brutal environment hardwired a dangerous psychological association into his developing brain. Love, safety, and physical affection were entirely conditional, and adulthood represented nothing but pain, exploitation, and cruelty. As a direct emotional consequence, Michael's psyche essentially stopped aging. He developed severe traits of Peter Pan syndrome, completely rejecting the transition into psychological adulthood. He later built Neverland Ranch, a sprawling fortress equipped with a Ferris wheel, a petting zoo, and arcade games. As a desperate clinical coping mechanism to retroactively live the childhood he was violently denied. But this deeply rooted trauma didn't just stunt his emotional growth, it eventually drove him to surgically erase his own identity. During Michael's awkward teenage years, Joe Jackson found a new, psychological way to torment him. He constantly mocked Michael's physical appearance, specifically singling out the shape of his nose and repeatedly calling him Big Nose. In clinical psychology, this type of verbal abuse is a textbook trigger for body dysmorphic disorder, or BDD. Michael developed a paralyzing, lifelong obsession with his perceived physical flaws. Driven by the unhealed trauma of his father's mockery, Jackson used cosmetic surgery as a weapon of psychological displacement. He wasn't just fixing a nose, he was surgically destroying any physical resemblance to the man who abused him. The surgeries were relentless and catastrophic. Following his death, his dermatologist confirmed that Jackson's nasal cartilage had totally collapsed from repetitive, excessive procedures. But the physical destruction of Michael Jackson didn't stop there. In 1984, Jackson suffered severe second- and third-degree burns to his scalp when his hair caught fire during a Pepsi commercial explosion. The permanent destruction of his hair follicles forced him to wear a glued-on wig for the rest of his life. Even worse, the agonizing pain of the burns and subsequent scalp surgeries introduced him to heavy opioid painkillers. For a man already suffering from profound psychic pain and chronic anxiety, the drugs provided a dangerous emotional numbing effect, sparking a lifelong battle with dependency. As Jackson became reliant on painkillers, his facial structure collapsed, and then, inexplicably, his skin began to turn stark white. The media saw a freak show. By the 1990s, they ruthlessly attacked him, claiming he was intentionally bleaching his skin because he hated his African-American heritage. The psychological effect of this global dehumanization was devastating. In 1993, a visibly heartbroken Jackson pleaded with the public on national television, stating, "I have a skin disorder that destroys the pigmentation of the skin. When people make up stories that I don't want to be who I am, it hurts me." The public largely refused to believe him, but the official Los Angeles County Coroner's autopsy report would later prove that he was telling the exact medical truth. Jackson suffered from a severe case of vitiligo, an organic disease that destroyed his pigment-producing cells, leaving his body covered in stark white patches. He also battled systemic lupus erythematosus, a chronic autoimmune disease that severely scarred his lungs and inflamed his skin. As the vitiligo rapidly progressed across his face and hands, covering the white blotches with dark makeup became aesthetically impossible. To avoid looking permanently speckled on camera, medical professionals prescribed FDA-approved depigmenting creams, like Benequin, to strip the remaining dark pigment and create a uniform, pale appearance. He wasn't trying to erase his race, he was desperately treating a disfiguring medical condition. How could a man so physically and emotionally fragile achieve such unprecedented global dominance? The answer lies in his staggering, often misunderstood intellect. Michael Jackson possessed what Harvard psychologists define as multiple intelligences. He was a serendipitous genius with profound musical, spatial, and bodily kinesthetic intelligence. In the recording studio and the boardroom, he was calculated, visionary, and a ferocious perfectionist who refused to let record executives dictate his worth. But there was a tragic, fatal disconnect in his brain. While his creative intelligence was off the charts, his social and emotional intelligence had been permanently stunted by his lifelong isolation. He completely lacked the mature social boundaries necessary to navigate a predatory adult world safely. Because he identified so deeply with the innocence of children, he constantly sought their company to heal his own wounded inner child, a psychological defense mechanism known as projective identification. He believed his pure intentions were enough to protect him from public suspicion. They weren't. This total lack of adult boundaries made him a prime target for extortion, paranoia, and a relentless media frenzy. It even led to his name appearing posthumously in the highly controversial, unsealed 2024 Jeffrey Epstein court documents. When the files dropped, the media once again assumed the worst. But a close reading of the sworn deposition of the key witness, Johanna Schoberg, reveals a different story. While she testified that Jackson briefly visited an Epstein residence in Palm Beach, when she was explicitly asked under oath if she had ever massaged Jackson or if he engaged in any illicit behavior, she firmly replied, "I did not." Unlike others named in the sprawling scandal, Jackson was completely exonerated by the witness testimony. Which brings us back to the shocking FBI investigation that gripped the world. In 2003, as Jackson faced a highly publicized criminal trial for child abuse, the FBI provided elite technical assistance to local California law enforcement. The FBI's computer analysis response team confiscated 16 of Jackson's personal hard drives and computers. The world braced for the horrifying evidence they assumed would be found. But what did the FBI actually uncover? According to the official, declassified 333-page FBI dossier, absolutely nothing. The exhaustive federal forensic analysis concluded that there were 0 incriminating files on any of his devices, and his computer history contained no record of accessing or searching for illegal material. Furthermore, after assisting local police globally for over a decade, providing behavioral analysis, and investigating multiple allegations, the FBI concluded there was no evidence of criminal conduct on Jackson's part. He was acquitted of all charges by a jury in 2005. But the truth arrived too late. The damage was already terminal. The years of intense legal suspicion, global humiliation, and relentless media dehumanization shattered what was left of his psyche. Jackson became a prisoner of his own fame, drowning in clinical paranoia, severe emotional dependency, and crippling anxiety. By the time he was rehearsing for his This Is It comeback tour in 2009, his mind was so hyper-aroused by terror, pressure, and perfectionism that he developed a fatal sleep disorder. Trapped in a state of constant vigilance, he was entirely unable to achieve natural REM sleep. Desperate for unconsciousness, he begged his personal physician for a powerful, hospital-grade surgical anesthetic called propofol. In a chilling reflection of his stunted, childlike mind, Jackson affectionately called the milky white chemical his milk. On the morning of June 25, 2009, exhausted and physically frail, Michael Jackson's reported last words to his doctor were a tragic, desperate plea for more milk. Michael Jackson was not a simple villain, nor was he an untouchable, invincible god. He was a profoundly gifted but psychologically fractured human being, crushed by impossible global fame, relentless public obsession, and an identity crisis that began the moment his father stole his youth. He was a man who spent his entire life desperately trying to recreate the safety of childhood, only to die begging his doctor for milk.